The courtroom was filled with an unnerving tension. Every corner seemed to echo with hushed whispers as the gallery sat tightly packed, waiting for the next round of questions to be asked. At the front, under the harsh glare of the overhead lights, a stern, middle-aged judge sat at the bench, his face impassive, his eyes narrowed with focus. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the edge of his gavel as he listened intently, a silent guardian of the proceedings. His gaze occasionally flickered to the young girl seated on the witness stand, her small form practically swallowed by the oversized chair. The girl, no older than 8, sat still as a statue, though her eyes betrayed the confusion swirling inside her. Her small hands gripped the edges of the wooden seat, her knuckles pale, while her legs swung lightly beneath her, unable to reach the ground. The child was clearly nervous. Despite her youthful age, there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself. She was far too young to fully understand the magnitude of the situation she was in, but something about her presence made everyone in the courtroom pause. Her dark eyes flickered nervously between the lawyer and the judge, not fully grasping the weight of the questions being asked, but feeling their burden all the same. To her right, the adoptive parents sat close together, their hands clasped in front of them. They tried their best to look reassuring, offering her comforting smiles, but the tension between them and the girl's biological parents was palpable. Her biological parents were conspicuously absent, their absence a silent accusation hanging over the case. The girl's biological mother and father had not attended the trial, and their silence seemed to speak volumes. It was clear this was not just a legal battle. It was an emotional one. The courtroom had been silent except for the lawyer's voice as he stood to ask another round of questions. His tone was calm, but it lacked warmth, his questions carrying the weight of his intentions as he tried to paint a picture of happiness, stability, and security in the home of the adoptive parents. "Do you like living with your mom and dad?" the lawyer asked, looking directly at the girl. His voice was methodical, each word calculated to guide her toward an answer that would favor his client. The girl hesitated, her eyes darting between the lawyer and her adoptive parents. She nodded slowly, but it was a hesitant gesture, one that didn't entirely speak to the full truth of her feelings. She didn't understand why she was being asked about this, why they wanted her to speak about her home. She had no words to explain her feelings. The lawyer pressed further. "Do you feel safe and happy with them?" Again, the girl hesitated. She wasn't sure how to answer. There were so many feelings inside her, feelings she didn't know how to express. She loved her adoptive parents, yes, but something didn't feel right about this whole thing. "Are they your real parents?" the lawyer continued, leaning forward, sensing the moment of uncertainty. His words hung in the air like a sharp knife, cutting deeper into the heart of the trial. The girl's small frame shook slightly as she tried to make sense of the question. Her eyes briefly met those of her adoptive mother, who smiled encouragingly, but there was something in her eyes that seemed forced. The girl opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the room fell deathly quiet, as though everyone was holding their breath. Her tiny voice broke through the silence, her words clear and firm. "No," she said without hesitation. The room stilled. Every person in the courtroom froze. The lawyer, momentarily stunned, blinked and looked at the judge as if searching for guidance. Her words had cut through the air with the sharpness of a blade. The judge's expression, however, remained unreadable. The little girl continued, her voice just as strong. "They are not my real parents." As the questioning continued, the young girl shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her legs swung beneath her, her fingers still gripping the edge of the wooden stand. She had answered the lawyer's questions, though each one seemed to grow more repetitive, more probing. Her small body was stiff, not because of fear, but because of the weight of the situation. She didn't know how to explain what she felt, or why she had this gnawing feeling deep inside her. It was as though she was being asked to fit herself into a box that wasn't hers. But then, something inside her seemed to snap. Without warning, the girl's voice rang out, cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife. "They're not my parents." The words echoed in the silence, shocking everyone in the room. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried with such clarity that it left no room for ambiguity. The courtroom fell into complete silence. Even the judge paused mid-motion, his hand frozen in midair as he prepared to strike the gavel. All eyes turned toward the girl, who sat there with a calmness beyond her years. She wasn't trembling or looking for reassurance. Her gaze was steady, her lips pressed tightly together. The tension in the air was so thick it was almost suffocating. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for what would happen next. The judge, still in shock, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses before speaking, his voice surprisingly soft. "Young lady, I need you to explain what you mean. Why do you say that they are not your parents?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any legal argument or closing statement. The judge, usually firm and composed, now appeared somewhat uncertain. He wasn't sure what to make of this sudden outburst, especially from such a young child. The little girl pointed toward the adoptive parents sitting nervously beside her, her small finger trembling just a little. "They're not my real family," she said, her voice unwavering. "They just sit there. They don't love me the way my real mommy does." Her eyes wandered back to the floor, as though she were retreating into memories too distant for words. A murmur rippled through the room. The adoptive parents glanced at each other in surprise, their faces pale. The tension had now shifted from the attorneys to them. The lawyer for the adoptive parents was on his feet in an instant, looking as though he were about to intervene. But the judge raised his hand to silence him. The girl continued, her voice now softer but no less certain. "I remember my real mommy. I remember her face, but I don't remember much else. I don't remember why I'm not with her. I don't know why I'm here with them," she said, looking directly at her adoptive parents, who seemed to shrink back in their seats. They don't care for me the way I think parents should. They're always nice, but they're not real nice. It's not like my mommy, when she used to hold me and tell me everything would be okay." The room was still. The girl's words hit everyone like a wave crashing against the shore. The sound of her innocence in the face of such raw emotion left no one unaffected. Her statement wasn't one of defiance, but of pure truth, as though the weight of her inner conflict had finally come pouring out. The judge looked at her carefully, his face unreadable now, but his eyes full of a quiet understanding. "I see," he said slowly, his voice calm but filled with an unmistakable tenderness. He turned his gaze to the adoptive parents, who remained silent, the weight of the accusation hanging over them like a heavy cloud. The adoptive father shifted in his seat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The mother beside him wiped away a tear, her face a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. They hadn't expected this. In all their years of raising the girl, they had believed that their love for her was enough. But now, in the eyes of this innocent child, it seemed that love wasn't something that could simply be given. It had to be understood. The judge, his tone now firmer, addressed the court. "This is unexpected," he began. "But I believe this young lady deserves to be heard. We will need to pause the proceedings to allow time for further reflection on what has been said. This matter is far from simple." He motioned to the bailiff, signaling for a brief recess. As the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations, the girl remained quiet, her small body still seated on the stand, her mind clearly lost in thought. The room had changed, its energy shifted by her brave, unexpected outburst. For the first time in the entire trial, the girl had spoken her truth, and it was clear. This battle for custody was no longer just about legal papers. It was about love and the deep, unspoken needs of a child searching for the truth of her own identity. The tension in the room had yet to dissipate, the weight of the girl's words still hanging in the air. She sat on the witness stand, her small frame seemingly much too delicate for the gravity of the situation. But as the judge nodded, signaling for the lawyer to continue, a subtle change in the girl's demeanor occurred. She was no longer fidgeting or shrinking away. Instead, she looked ahead with a calmness that belied her age. With a gentle prompting from her lawyer, who leaned forward with compassion in his eyes, the girl began to speak once more. This time, her voice was softer, but it carried the same quiet strength. "After my real mommy left me, I don't remember much," she began, her voice wavering ever so slightly. "I remember her face, and I remember feeling safe with her. But one day, she was just gone. I don't know why." The words seemed to catch in her throat for a moment, but she pushed through. The courtroom remained silent as she continued, her eyes now fixed on the floor. "I went to lots of different places. The foster homes, they were all different. Some people were kind, but most didn't care. I just stayed in my room a lot, waiting to be loved." She paused, a hint of sorrow in her expression, though her face remained mostly neutral. The lawyer spoke softly, offering her a moment to gather herself. "And after that, what happened?" he asked gently. The girl glanced up at him, her eyes wide with the innocence of youth, yet tinged with an understanding far beyond her years. "Then I came to live with them," she said, pointing to the adoptive parents seated beside her. "They took me in, and at first it seemed okay. They gave me food and clothes and a place to stay, but it didn't feel like home." The adoptive parents, seated in the gallery, exchanged uneasy glances. They had always believed that the act of bringing the girl into their home was an act of love. But as they listened to her speak, their conviction began to crack. This wasn't what they had expected, and it certainly wasn't what they had hoped for her. The girl continued, her voice soft but growing more resolute with each word. "They never really hugged me. They never told me they loved me. I just stayed in my room, like a guest, not like a daughter." Her voice faltered for a brief moment, but she steadied herself before continuing. "I didn't feel like I belonged there. I felt lonely." A hush fell over the courtroom, and even the judge seemed to soften in his chair, his expression one of deep empathy. He glanced at the girl, his eyes filled with understanding. As her voice began to crack, the girl's emotions broke through the calm facade she had been holding up. "I don't feel safe there," she whispered. "I don't feel wanted. I wish they would love me, like my real mommy did, or like I see other families love each other." Her small hands clenched tightly in her lap, the tears threatening to spill but never fully breaking free. The girl's words were heavy, filled with a rawness that sent a ripple through the courtroom. There was no hiding the truth in her voice, no pretense. She was just a child, longing for something she had never known, the warmth of love and the security of a family who truly cared for her. With trembling hands, she added, her voice barely a whisper, "I just want a family who will love me. Not just give me a bed to sleep in or food to eat. I want a family who will hold me when I'm scared and tell me that everything will be okay." The courtroom sat in stunned silence, every heart in the room aching for the girl's pain. The girl's desire was simple, yet profound. The love of a real family, one that saw her not as a responsibility, but as someone worth loving. As the girl finished speaking, her words hung in the air. She had given voice to her deepest wish, a wish for something more than what she had ever been given, something so basic, yet so elusive. The judge, looking as if he had been deeply moved by her testimony, leaned forward. "I think, young lady," he said with quiet sincerity, "you have shown us all what is most important here." He paused, his voice steady. "We will take your words into consideration." The room, still silent, seemed to hold its breath, and for a moment all that could be heard was the soft sound of the girl's breathing, the weight of her truth settling over the courtroom like a blanket. The courtroom was filled with a heavy silence after the girl's words had cut through the air. Her honesty had stunned everyone, especially the adoptive parents, whose faces twisted with embarrassment and guilt. They had expected the trial to be difficult, but never did they anticipate this sudden outpouring of truth from the young girl sitting before them. The judge, who had been unwavering throughout the trial, now leaned forward, absorbing the weight of her statement. His gaze was locked on the girl with a newfound intensity. His fingers gripped the edge of his bench, but there was no firmness in his posture, only a quiet empathy. For a moment, the room remained still. The tension was thick, suffocating. The courtroom was on the edge of its seat, waiting for the judge to speak. He took a slow breath and then, with remarkable tenderness, he addressed the girl. "You have been incredibly brave to speak the truth," the judge said, his voice soft but steady. "That was not an easy thing to do." The girl didn't react outwardly. Her eyes, still looking down at her small hands, seemed to take in his words, but it was unclear whether she understood just how much weight her confession carried. The judge's voice remained kind, not harsh, as if to reassure her. "I want you to take your time now. This is important, and we are all listening to you. What is it that you want?" His question was gentle, as though he was asking a child what they needed from a friend. The girl glanced up at the judge, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes before she spoke again. Her voice, though small, carried with it the weight of a longing that no child should have to bear. "I just want to find a real family, one that will love me, one that will treat me like I'm their own." Her voice trembled slightly but carried with it an undeniable certainty. "I don't care about money. I don't care about things. I just want love. I want to feel like I belong somewhere." The room seemed to breathe in unison with her words. The adoptive parents, who had been sitting rigidly beside her, looked stricken. They had given her food, shelter, and material comforts. But it was clear to everyone in that room that these things were not what the child needed most. The girl's request for love, warmth, and a true sense of belonging had shifted the entire atmosphere of the trial. The judge, without hesitation, nodded in acknowledgement of her request. "Thank you for sharing that with us," he said softly. "Your voice is important, and we are here to listen." The girl seemed to relax slightly, though her words had already shaken the foundations of the trial. It wasn't just about custody anymore. It wasn't about legal rights or documents. It was about a child's desperate need to be loved and accepted. As the judge looked around the courtroom, it was clear that something had shifted in the proceedings. The path forward wasn't simple. But for the first time in this trial, there was no doubt that the girl's voice, her truth, had to be the heart of the decision. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs after the girl's emotional outburst. The judge, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, made a decision to pause the proceedings. He stood from his seat, his voice firm but filled with concern. "This is a matter of urgent importance," the judge announced, his tone commanding the room's attention. "I am ordering an immediate investigation into the girl's background. We need to ensure her safety, and we must explore every possible alternative to guarantee her well-being." The room went silent, and the judge's words seemed to resonate deeply with everyone present. The situation had escalated beyond a simple custody case. It was now a matter of the girl's emotional and physical safety. Social workers were called in almost immediately. They filed into the courtroom, their presence a sign that the judge was not taking this matter lightly. The judge turned toward the adoptive parents, his expression a mixture of disappointment and concern. "While this is not easy, we must approach this with compassion," he said. "I am disappointed in the evidence presented thus far, but I urge us all to remember the child at the heart of this. We must act in her best interest." The adoptive parents, clearly shaken, remained silent, their eyes downcast. As the investigation began, the girl was temporarily placed in a safe home, away from the tense courtroom atmosphere. The judge ordered that she receive the care and attention she needed during this time. With the investigation now underway, the court would deliberate further on the custody case, taking into account the new revelations. The girl's well-being was the priority now, an issue that would shape the next steps of the trial. The investigation into the girl's background uncovered a shocking revelation. Social workers dug deep into her past, uncovering information about her biological mother that none of them had expected. It was revealed that her biological mother had struggled for years with addiction, a battle that had left her unable to care for her daughter. The circumstances surrounding her abandonment were heartbreaking. Her mother's inability to provide the stability and care the girl so desperately needed had ultimately led to her placement in the foster system. As the findings were presented in court, the atmosphere shifted. The judge, having heard the new details, made a decision that surprised everyone. "I am ordering that the girl not be returned to her biological mother," the judge declared, his voice firm yet compassionate. "Given the circumstances, I believe it is in her best interest to find a family that can provide the love and care she deserves. We will begin a search for a foster family who is ready to adopt her and offer the safety and affection she has been denied for too long." The courtroom sat in stunned silence, the weight of the decision settling over everyone present. The judge had made a bold move, prioritizing the girl's need for love and stability over the complexities of her biological family's struggles. But there was a flicker of hope amidst the decision. The girl's case received national attention, and soon a kind family saw her story in the news. They reached out, expressing interest in adopting her and offering her the loving home she had yearned for. For the first time in a long while, the girl felt a glimmer of hope. She might finally find the family she had always dreamed of. In the final court hearing, the atmosphere was filled with anticipation. The judge listened intently as the girl spoke again, her voice steady but filled with hope. She was finally going to have the chance she had longed for, a fresh start. "Based on everything we've learned, I am ordering that you be placed with a family that has been thoroughly vetted," the judge said, turning to the girl. "This is your chance to begin anew, and I promise you, you'll be surrounded by love and care." The girl's eyes sparkled with emotion as the words sank in. This was it. She was going to have the family she deserved. The scene shifted to her new home. The door opened to reveal a loving couple waiting to welcome her. They embraced her warmly, enveloping her in the security and love she had always yearned for. She finally felt like she belonged. As the judge left the courtroom, he took a moment to reflect. He smiled, knowing that the courage of one child had shaped a future filled with hope. The girl's voice had made all the difference, and now she was on the path to a life of happiness and belonging. The story closes with a scene of pure joy. The girl, now laughing and playing with her new family, races around the living room, her face lighting up with a joy that had been absent for so long. Her new parents watch with smiles, their arms wide open, ready to embrace her in every moment. For the first time, she feels truly at home, safe, loved, and wanted. The love and warmth she had always yearned for are finally hers. As the laughter echoes through the house, it's clear that a new chapter has begun for her, one filled with hope and endless possibilities. She is no longer a child lost in the shadows of neglect. She is a child surrounded by the love and security she deserves, and her future, bright and full of promise, lies ahead.